Hey there, Coach Julia here. If you're on this channel, you probably know that I'm a weightlifting coach. You're here to get knowledge and information about the sport of Olympic weightlifting. But what you might not know is that I spent years as a gymnastics coach. And over the years of transitioning from one sport to the other, I came to realize that there are some very, very big deficits in our understanding of what is appropriate strength and conditioning for gymnasts. Oftentimes I find that at the recreational level, coaches, gymnastics coaches in particular, are fearful of introducing strength training movements to athletes for fear of making them bigger, tighter, slower, less flexible, less explosive. And the reality is that couldn't be further from the truth. Strength training, in fact, is incredibly preventative and proactive in terms of developing more robust and resilient gymnasts. Because this is a subject matter that's incredibly near and dear to my heart, my partner is a gymnast and owns a gymnastics gym. Many of our friends are former retired gymnasts. I hear a lot of the same dogma around how to train gymnasts. So I am here to give you my top 4 favorite strength exercises for gymnasts, why I think they're effective, and how they can be scaled down to really novice athletes if you're working with kids, or really bumped up if you're starting to work with athletes at the collegiate level. So before I jump into these, I want to make something very, very clear. Gymnastics is a skill-based sport. These athletes spend hours and hours and years acquiring particular motor patterns and the ability to perform certain skills at very, very high levels. They need to be strong, but it is not a strength sport. There is a very explicit need for strength conditioning for gymnasts because there is a lot of impact in that sport. They're having to land very high velocity jumps. They're moving very, very quickly and needing to learn how to support their own body weight repetitively, time and time again, not only in one routine, but in multiple routines across a several-hour practice. There is a lot of overuse injuries that tends to happen in gymnastics, and there can be a number of asymmetries that develop because of the types of movement that we're looking at, particularly unilateral and rotational exercises that tend to be done only on one side. So I'm going into this video thinking about those variables of how do we prevent potential overuse injuries that are fairly common in gymnastics, how do we develop stronger athletes, and how do we develop gymnasts that are really robust and can endure the rigors of training. Okay, my first must-have exercise in a gymnast strength program is the squat. Gymnasts have to learn how to squat properly. 1, they need to understand how to create spinal stiffness while simultaneously having mobility in the hip, right? If we think about the types of movements that most gymnasts are in, oftentimes they are in hollows, right? Which is this, that rib cage is down, the pelvis is tucked under. They can maintain a lot of good tension through their abdomen like this. But the minute you have them move into a neutral spine, which is really what we need for a squat, they actually no longer have the capability most of the time of maintaining that stiffness and that trunk stability. So teaching them how to allow their hips to flex, how to keep their pelvis in a neutral position rather than in a hollow position in this anteriorly tilted one, and still maintain a lot of that intra-abdominal pressure and the ability to maintain stiffness in their trunk is going to be so important, not only for their performance, but also for their overall health moving out of the sport eventually. So what does that mean? If you've got kids, if you're working with really novice gymnasts, it's very, very simple. Feet shoulder width apart. We're going to try to keep feet flat on the ground. I'm going to cue sitting straight down between the heels rather than tipping the hips backwards. That's going to start to move us into a hinge pattern, which is something else we're going to talk about in the context of this video. But I'm going to teach them how to stay really tall through their body, sit their hips straight down, arms can come out as a counterbalance, and they're going to try to sit without relaxing in the bottom. If we remember, most gymnasts are hypermobile. They need to understand how to maintain stiffness while simultaneously having flexibility. It's a really important skill. If you're starting to work with teenagers or athletes that are just large enough to handle some load, we can do the same thing with either a dumbbell or a kettlebell in a goblet style squat. That implement is just going to be at the front of their chest. They're going to stand nice and tall. Again, they're going to try to sit all the way down. Their knees should come forward. Torso stays up. They sit straight down between the heels. Right back up. For a lot of athletes, that might very well be all you need to do, is just a little bit of load anteriorly, getting them to squat, helping them build a lot of that control and that strength in their hips. But also, when we are talking about pure strength development, the squat is the king. If we have strong, resilient legs, you can produce a lot of force, which is really going to carry over to their tumbling. Whether they're on floor, whether they're vaulting, you're going to really start to see an uptake in the amount of speed that they can generate on the vault track. You're going to start to see the amount of force and power they're able to execute through punching off of the board or on the floor. You're really going to start to see an overall improvement in their athletic abilities just by squatting. Now, if you have slightly older gymnasts or gymnasts that are ready to move on to a more complex apparatus, we're going to give them a barbell, and we're going to start off with a back squat. Now, there's a lot of frowny faces around introducing back squats to athletes because maybe they're dangerous. That's purely load selection, right? The danger in the movement is purely on how it's introduced. Is it taught correctly? And how is it loaded? Is it appropriate for that athlete and for the sport? I think a back squat is actually most of the time much safer and much easier to learn than a front squat. It doesn't require the same kind of mobility that some athletes, gymnasts included, might be missing, right? We've got tons of mobility in this range of motion, but maybe not a whole lot to get into a rack position because it's just not a range of motion that's used. Okay, so hands are just about thumbs width outside of the shoulder, and that bar is resting on their upper traps, right? Those little pillows of muscles right at the base of their neck where it meets their shoulders. Same foot mechanics, torso up, I'm pulling the bar down into my body, sit, push. My second favorite exercise for gymnasts is a single leg deadlift, and this is really twofold. One, oftentimes most gymnasts don't know how to hinge correctly because they're so reliant on very lengthened hamstrings for all the skills that they have to perform that a lot of times they don't know how to generate force through their hamstrings in a way that might be meaningful. So teaching them how to hinge correctly is important. The single leg variable is huge because oftentimes, I talked about this before, there may be some unintentional asymmetries that are developed in gymnasts, and it comes from often doing all skills on one side. They might tumble off of one leg, right? If they're doing very, very rudimentary things like handstands, cartwheels, round offs, it's generally unilateral. They're generally pushing off of the same side each time. If they're doing flexibility skills like their splits, they probably have one side that they are better at and gets trained more. So what ends up happening is one hamstring gets a little bit more lengthened, one hip flexor gets a little bit more lengthened, and now their pelvis is slightly askew. Many of the gymnasts that I know have visible or palpable spinal erector development differences, meaning the muscles on their back, their spinal erectors, are more developed on one side than on the other, and that comes from rotational activities, right? If we're constantly creating torque in the same direction, or even turning, if they're always turning in the same direction, you're gonna start to see those little asymmetries pop up, and unilateral work on one side of the body, one arm, one leg, is a really great way to counteract that. Okay, so teaching a hinge can be very, very tricky. This is how I like to approach it, at least for this particular population. So I'm gonna have them, one, lift that chest up really high, they're gonna go into an arch, and then they're gonna go into a hollow. So we can start to tell the difference between hyperextended and hyperflex, and we actually wanna be right in the middle. So if they're here, that's too much. If they're here, that's too much. We wanna be right in the middle. And it's just teaching them how to maintain that relationship between their rib cage and their hips. Now I'm gonna give them an object at the bottom of their feet. Again, if you've got little ones, it could be a pit cube, it could be a medicine ball. Eventually, as they get a little bit older, again, we're gonna come back to that kettlebell, that dumbbell, then maybe a bar. But I'm gonna maintain this relationship here, and you can have them put their hands on their hips and their ribs, and they're gonna unlock their knees. This part is really important because most gymnasts are so flexible that they can come down without losing any length in their back and just completely pull on their hamstrings. So we want rib cage and hips, soft unlock knees. And then they're gonna try to touch their butt to the wall behind them as they tip forward. If they lose this relationship between rib and hip, they're gonna try to find it again, okay? And then from there, they're just gonna put their hands on that bell. And again, it's important that their knees are bent, they can come down, and they're gonna try to keep it really close to their body. When they get to the top, I know this one's tricky, we need the same relationship between ribs and hips. I'm not here, I've suddenly lost that middle, I've lost those abdominals. So we're gonna keep that tight. Butt goes back, unlocked knees, come down, touch, right back up. So that's a very, very simple way of teaching a hinge. Now for a single leg hinge, all I'm gonna do is have them take one foot and put that toe, that ball of the foot, just behind the front heel. And all of my leg is gonna shift to that front leg now. And then I do the same thing. As you start to progress this more, I would start loading with just one arm. So a double arm hold is awesome in the beginning. Again, as we want to address some of those asymmetries that happen, you're going to load whatever hand is opposite from the front leg. So if they're keeping their left leg in front and hinging, again, butt goes backwards, knee is soft, rib cage and hips are all the same, they come up, then we're going to load in that opposite hand. Butt travels backward, knee is unlocked, stays right on top of that ankle, standing leg has most of the weight, down. So again, super important to teach them how to not only hinge properly and feel their hamstrings, right? Learn how to create hip extension from their hips, which is their butts, and their hamstrings rather than their lower lumbar, because gymnasts are super duper mobile. We see it all the time, right? They can create a lot of range of motion through their lower back, but it's not necessarily a powerful muscle, right? Their spinal erectors are there for stability. They're not there for movers. My third and final favorite strength exercise for gymnasts is going to be the power jerk. So I love power jerks in general because they're very simple footwork. They teach us how to change direction quickly, and they rely on a really strong lockout. And where this matters for gymnasts is it's going to make a big impact on their ability to block against the vault table. We need to be able to be really fast in changing direction and then maintain a lot of stiffness in their elbows and their shoulders, right? Just like if they were going in for a vault, you want them to really resist against that table and not give into it. So a power jerk is a really great way to teach that. Again, if you've got little ones, use a med ball, use a pit cube. We're just gonna start with that implement at the front of their body. They're gonna bend their knees as if they're about to jump, because they are. They're gonna do a vertical jump, and then they're going to jump down and push up at the same time. Here, I get ready, I jump and I land. Get ready, jump, land with straight arms. Now this happens all the time with new weightlifters, with adult weightlifters. When they move under the bar, they forget that they have to keep their elbows locked out, or maybe they just don't have that range of motion and they're gonna land with soft elbows. And the more you reinforce this, the faster and the stronger they're gonna get in that lockout. We're gonna progress this with dumbbells. So dumbbells are gonna rest on shoulders, chest up nice and tall, get ready to jump, jump, land, see my elbows are locked out, stand up, reset. And then again, if it's appropriate to introduce a bar, we're gonna do the same thing. The bar's gotta rest on their body, head is out of the way, bend, jump, catch, reset. The power jerk is in general a really great exercise for strength and power development for overhead athletes. Most people just don't think of gymnasts as overhead athletes, but they are. We've got to get into really good positions here and create a lot of force through that upper body while moving very, very quickly. So if you're out there and you're a gymnast, you're a former gymnast, you coach gymnastics, maybe you're a strength and conditioning coach and you're trying to work with gymnasts, I'd love to know what questions you have, what difficulties you run into. If there's types of injuries that I didn't mention that are pretty chronic that you think could be remedied through some implementation of some strength training early on, I'd love to hear about it. Again, this is a subject that I'm pretty close to and doesn't get talked about a lot. So I'd like to be able to share a little bit more. So please leave any comments you have down below. I'm really happy to get back to them. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about weightlifting, then check out some of the other videos on this channel or check out my weightlifting foundations guide down below. Thanks so much. Hope this helps. See you on the platform.